Well, hello and welcome back to another week on my allotment. And I think I start every video by saying this, but it tends to be true, and that is that this week has been absolutely dominated by one thing: the weather. It is the wettest March. The site is completely waterlogged. There's standing water everywhere. We're going backwards, I swear. The only good thing to say about the weather is the temperatures are very mild. So we're getting anywhere between 11 and 15 or 16 degrees during the day, and the nighttime temperatures are no lower than 3. I mean, we've had evenings or night times where the temperature's up at 10. But it's, you know, if you've got, you know, seedlings growing, you'll know. I've brought you saw me, I've brought a gutter, the first gutter of peas to go in. I can't put them in because the ground is has got standing water where the peas are going to go. So yeah, it's proving a challenge. It's testing my patience, or the lack of. Anyway, you know, it's all part and parcel of growing fruits and vegetables. You know, the seed packet may say transplant out in March, but you know, when you come up here and everything is sodden and standing water, and it's raining now, albeit lightly, you know, so be it. So on the plot today, I'm going to show you in a minute where I found another way of getting another row of second early potatoes in. The sweet peas that self-seeded in my beds last autumn, they are now so long and lanky, and they're starting to go a bit yellow, so they're pot bound. So whatever the weather does, they've got to go in the ground. And luckily this cut flower bed, which is up by the shed, there is a very slight gradient on my plot, and we're at the upper end here, so they're going in, and they'll have to just get on with the conditions. What else? I've got some more seedlings that I'm putting in the cold frames up here, because the windowsill at home and the greenhouse are chock-a-block. It's a bit like that game Tetris, where you try and make things fit, and you know, it's getting harder to find places because I'm growing more and more seedlings, but the weather's not conducive with putting anything out. So I'm sure everyone else is finding that, and it is a challenge. It's amazing, some people, it doesn't matter how wet their plots get, they don't seem to get waterlogged, and other people have it far worse than me, where, you know, it's like the tide coming in and out. Anyway, you're very welcome along. I've got all day up here. I hope you remember the clocks went forward. My wife was distraught because it meant she lost an hour's sleep, but she can lie in as long as she wants because I'm up here not irritating her. So yeah, the clocks went forward last night, which meant it was darker here this morning, but we'll have longer evenings, which is lovely. It means I'll be able to do a lot more in the garden. I have to be outdoors. I can't. You know, some of our neighbours, you never see them out of their houses. What do people do in their houses all day, every day? I can't abide being indoors. I love to be outdoors. Anyway, and one of my subscribers asked me to explain rhubarb forcing, so I'll speak about that for a couple of minutes. But let's crack on with some work. Well, the first thing I'll say is that these ropes can come down now. It's been wet and windy for a couple of 3 weeks now, and we've had some winds up around 40-50 miles an hour, and when that happens I put this thick rope over the plastic roof, because I'm always worried that that roof is going to get caught by the wind and ripped off. So they can come off today, because as you can tell from the flag, there is no wind despite the rain. And here is an example of the standing water. The bottom of the lower strawberry bed. Those strawberries have only just got their heads above water. And so it is with the fruit bush bed, standing water. And that's where the peas were meant to go. Well, that's no good, they will have to wait. And the broad bean bed, again, Not quite as much standing water, but not good. The last of our garlic, I put in 5 rows. Eden Rose garlic. Never grown that one before, but from what I can see, they've almost all stuck their heads up now. So very pleased with that. Because there's only 5 rows, it leaves this area here where I can put some of my onion seeds that I've grown. And in fact, that onion bed there, there's a gap. I can squeeze some onions in there. But in amongst all this doom and gloom with the weather, I just wanted to say that I've had some good news. Does anyone else spend a lot of time bent over staring at ground this time of year? I've had a couple of the asparagus spears poke their head out the ground, which is really pleasing. Earlier this week I put in 2 small rows of Kestrel second early potatoes. I've said before, they don't seem to be affected by the wireworms or the slugs, and they come out of the ground fairly clean, which is really good, because this ground is infested with slugs and snails. So I've put in a row there and a row there, and those duck boards there sat down the middle here to give me access to the ground. And I thought, hang on a minute, if I take those duck boards up, I can get in another row, a full row, because there's no wigwam here. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have to put some boards down so I can walk on that ground, because it's fairly sodden. But it doesn't get waterlogged, because going past it there's a deep ditch which keeps the water table down. So there's the potatoes in the wheelbarrow, and also I've got a tray there of Charlotte salad potatoes, and I was going to put all carrots in these tubs, try something different, but I've got carried away with myself, as I always do when I got the seed catalogue out, and I've bought a load more potatoes than I thought I had, and they've got to go somewhere, and I haven't got the ground here. I've run out of space, believe it or not, on 2 allotments plus a half. So I'm going to have to put some of those Charlottes in those tubs, because we do like our salad potatoes. Nice problems to have. And interesting to see that that middle rhubarb plant is the one I forced, and that was 2 weeks ago today that I took that crop of forced rhubarb, which was fantastic, and those plants had no leaves on them because they were forced, but look at them now. It's almost, I mean, they're a lot shorter because that's what happens, but they're gonna catch up with the other plants on the outside. Nature just wants to thrive. I first came across the term forcing rhubarb before I ever had an allotment. I think it was on something, Country File or whatever, where they took the cameras to a farmer up in Leicestershire, I think it is, or certainly up north, where they grow rhubarb in these vast sheds where all light is excluded, and they actually pick it by candlelight to keep all natural light out. And they claim that if you stand still in these big sheds, you can actually hear the rhubarb creaking as it grows. And the purpose of it is, and at a level on our allotments or in our gardens, you can use anything to force rhubarb. So I'd started mine in mid-January. As you start to see a little bit of signs of growth, you could use a bucket. You can buy terracotta rhubarb forcers from the garden centre. They're quite expensive, and I used a 45-gallon oil drum because my plants are quite big, and it worked beautifully. And by excluding all light from the rhubarb plant, what that does is it's twofold. It it prevents the development of leaves which are looking for chlorophyll, so there are no leaf growth. So all the effort goes into the stems, which grow a lot quicker because they're not developing leaves. So you get a much earlier crop. And the most important part of that is that the glucose held in the stems, which would normally pass into the leaf, remains in the stem because there is no leaf growth, because there is no light. And because that glucose remains in the stalks or the stems, they are so sweet. So the purpose of forcing rhubarb, which is just the exclusion of light with a bucket or a drum, whatever, dustbin, it develops a much earlier crop, and it's very sweet. I hope that helps. Right, so the next project, they're the Charlotte and they're the remaining kestrels. I've brought 2 tubs, one in a wheelbarrow and one behind it, and they are well rotted, excellent garden compost that I've made from made in the hop bin at home, and that stuff is going to go in the bottom of these tubs just to provide some goodness for the potatoes to thrive on. So the next job, which could get quite messy in this drizzle, is to plant up these potatoes. Right, let's get to it. Oh boy, lovely. Well, I'm doing those potatoes. I have a very low boredom threshold, but it's lovely to get them in. And I thought I'd have a break. I had a brew, re-stoked the fire, warmed my right knee up incredibly hot while the rest of me isn't. I don't really need the fire today, to be perfectly honest. It's not cold out there. I mean, the drizzle gets a bit depressing, but if my wife's coming up later on in the afternoon, I know she'll appreciate a nice warm shed. Anyway, I thought I'd say a bit more about Keel. Keel is in the north of Germany. It is a deep water harbour and going out into the Baltic Sea. And many years ago, it's all gone now, but the British Army had 2 facilities up at Keel in one of the German naval bases. One was a yacht club, so guys could go up there and do what they used to call adventure, well they still do call it adventure training, and go out on these large sailboats and learn the skills and the teamwork, etc, etc. And then next door to it, sharing the same bay, small bay, was the Royal Engineer Diver Training Wing for Germany. The main diver training facility was back in Portsmouth, shared with the Navy, but Germany had a thing there, so the divers could go up there and go out and do some deep water training, and they also ran diving aptitudes, as I mentioned in a previous video. So and you can imagine the 2 bodies of men that were working these 2 facilities were very different. The yachties had a different outlook on life, it's fair to say, than the divers, and although they were different personalities, to my knowledge they worked fairly well together. It's important to note that a lot of very senior army officers kept their yachts at this the yacht club, And in the winter, the yachty maintenance crews would take these officers' yachts out the water and would carry out routine maintenance. And I don't know this, so I'm talking out of hand, but I suspect that these very senior officers didn't have to pay for this facility. That's my guess, because that's the way the army works. That's the way life works, isn't it, really? And I had a look on Google Earth, and the jetty that we had for the diving training is still there to this day. We used to have a shed on it where we kept some of the diving kit, and it was called the Elephant because it just looked like a big grey elephant out on this jetty. Anyway, yeah, I've mentioned some of the things that went on. The story I've mentioned, but I'll retell it because some people haven't watched all the videos, Brian, was that when we went up to Keel, because we were going out to do deeper training in deeper water, we used to go to the compression chamber because it was a wonderful facility the German Navy had, and we used to put in a dive, you know, simulated depth in this chamber. And anyway, one day we got into this chamber, and it's run by a German civilian, a technician, and he put us in, and we told him the dive profile we wanted, and then he operates the wheels and the pressure gauges and that, and puts us down to the simulated depth in this compression chamber. And it was a big chamber, so the whole team fitted in. There must have been about 10 of us. Anyway, we'd had a night out the night before, and one of the guys had met a young German lady and had a very interesting evening with her. I shall say no more. And he was retelling the story in this compression chamber. Now, one of the funny things about being at pressure, whether it's in a chamber or in the water, is the pressure works on your voice box and it makes you talk with a squeaky voice. So listening to any story in a compression chamber is hilarious. But it was even more hilarious that this guy had got up to some antics, and being a married man, he shouldn't have been doing it. Anyway, as we were climbing out the chamber after the dive, and the chamber had surfaced and they opened the door, the German technician went to the diving supervisor and handed him a VHS tape. And if you don't know what a VHS tape is, you know, Google it. And he said, "What's this?" He said, "Oh, we record all our dives in case there's a medical incident, and this is the recording of your dive." And the supervisor says, "Oh, thank you very much." The look on this bloke's face, he wasn't aware, as none of us were, that they'd recorded everything he'd been saying, and now the dive supervisor had the evidence. And at a later date, I think it was at one of our diving bashes, we raffled this, and of course a few of us were bidding on it, knowing that this bloke had to buy it to destroy it. Anyway, it's, you know, it's immoral and all the rest of it, but it's funny. So that's one thing. The other thing was, just outside the naval base was a small bar, not a pub, but a bar. And it was the place, the nearest place, other than getting a taxi all the way into Keel city centre, that you could go for a couple of beers. And we never drank heavily up there because we were diving, and that's unprofessional. We'd just go and have a beer or two, and then go back and get an early night. And we were going out one of the first times when I was a very young raw recruit of a diver. And one of the guys was taking a wheelbarrow, an empty wheelbarrow. And I said to the supervisor, "What's he got a wheelbarrow for?" Willie Shaw was this fella's name, Willie Shaw, with a wheelbarrow. He says, "You'll see later on, don't worry about it." Anyway, we got to the bar and he left the wheelbarrow outside and went in. 2 beers later, this bloke was paralytic. 2 bottles, so they weren't pints. But, I mean, German beer is strong, but not that strong. Anyway, the bloke clearly had an issue with handling his beer. And he wandered outside and sat down and lay in this wheelbarrow, put his head back and fell asleep and snored like a foghorn. And then when we left the bar, a bloke called Dave Palmer, who was a big fella, he picked up the wheelbarrow and wheeled Willie Shaw back to the accommodation. Fantastic. The thing about Keel in the Second World War was it was a very strategic point because it had a deep water harbour and access to the Baltic Sea. And the Russians were coming. The Russians are coming. And the Germans were surrounded and they knew, you know, they were finished. But rather than let the Russians get all their military equipment, there was a massive pier that went out into the harbour. And the Germans drove vehicles out and they threw all their equipment and their rifles and their artillery pieces. Everything went off the end of this jetty. Well, you fast forward to the late 80s, early 90s when we were diving. We used to go over in boats to this jetty. It was called the weapons pit dive. And of course, you know, 60, 70 years after the war, this was thick, glutinous mud, as most harbours in Europe tend to be. But it was quite oily. And so we'd go over there for the day, put the boats over the top of this site, just off the end of the jetty. And we'd spend the day diving there. And all you did, you made sure you had thick neoprene gloves on, because you could come across sharp objects. And we dug down into this mud. And it would take about 3 divers, each working for about an hour each. Hard physical labour, digging away at the mud. And you can imagine, the moment you touch down on this mud, up come a cloud of silt. And for the rest of your dive, you saw nothing. And of course, consecutive divers afterwards, there was no hope of seeing anything. You worked by feel. And by the time 2 or 3 divers had been in, they were digging down deep enough that it was just your feet sticking out of this hole, and you were burrowing down like a mole, searching for items. Well, of course, heavier things, they'd long since rotted and disappeared. But I can remember one particular dive we went. We went a few times, but one particular dive stood out because we'd found 2 pristine objects. This mud, which is quite oily, preserved the metal quite well. The 2 things we pulled out, one was a German helmet. It didn't have a swastika on it, it had the German cross still painted on the helmet, and it was so well preserved. The leather insert inside the metal helmet, in the British helmets we used to call it a spider, but it's just a leather band that fits on your head to protect you from the hard metal. All of that, and the chin strap was perfectly intact. And back in the dive store, back in Hanley, they had some kind of water solution that would preserve these items. And the second one that they found was, I think it was called a thigh pistol. And as the name suggests, it's a lady's pistol. I don't suppose you're allowed to have them nowadays. But it was a lady's pistol, tiny little thing, that would fit in her garter. It's the sort of things spies carried. Anyway, that's what we found, and it was still in its tiny little leather holster. And when the diver came to the surface and handed it into the boat, it had a popper on the leather holster that covered over. The popper worked. He undid the leather holster, pulled out the pistol, and to make sure that there was no bullet inside the pistol, he worked the breech, the locking mechanism, and it slid, it moved. It was in perfect working order. Thankfully, there was no round inside the chamber, because if he'd let it off, it would have gone into the rib and sunk our boat. But yeah, remarkable that after 70 years in the sea, that pistol worked perfectly, and it was taken back. And I don't know what happened to either of the 2 items. I didn't find them personally, but I expect the blokes kept them for their own souvenirs. But yeah, a fantastic place. And interestingly, as the army became under more and more pressure with budgets, they were looking to make cuts. So you had a military training diving centre for operational diving, and a yacht club to have a nice time. Guess which one got cut? Senior officers keep their yachts up there. The dive team were scrapped the moment any pressure came. Yeah. And the Keel Yacht Club continued to work perfectly well. Isn't that the way life is? Anyway, you might find that mildly interesting. More wood. Well, I've run out of hot bin compost, but there's plenty more back at home. So that's 7 tubs done. That's all the excess kestrel in, and a couple of the Charlottes. So all my Kestrel second early potatoes are now planted either in this bit of ground here or these tubs. A few Charlottes to do, and I'll do those another time when I can bring up some more hot bin compost from home. Well, another little job ticked off. Some very small gutters of pea alderman. Now fill in the gaps as necessary. And the glass, the theory being obviously like a cold frame, it just adds a bit of shelter, protection, and slightly might raise the temperature. Right, they're on their own. The tray you just saw me put in the cold frame is a tray of multi-sown radishes. Never done that before. I guess they'll grow like the beetroot, where once they start to develop the bulbous root they'll push each other apart. I've just divided up those primroses and put them in this bed out the way of the vegetables. They look quite nice there. And then there's my overdeveloped sweet pea plants, and for better or for worse, they're in the ground now and they can get on with it. I think sweet peas are like peas, they're hardy down to about -5, so they should be fine, he says, over optimistically. Even with the weather as bad as it is, there's good news. The first sign that the asparagus has overwintered. Likewise, this blackberry. Signs of life. This blackberry, which I'm growing over the arch, is a prolific cropper. It was growing at home on the shed originally. But I'm really pleased to report where I've allowed it into the ground and pinned it down. Can you see there? It's clearly rooted and is starting to grow from that point, which is exactly what wild brambles do. So I'll be able to cut that off in about a month and I'll have a brand new plant. And I'm doing it in various spots. So hopefully they'll all be successful. Plants for free. The current 50-star US flag was designed in 1958 by a 17-year-old as part of a school project. He got a B. Could do better. A retired UN official has spent 25 years collecting 14,000 do not disturb signs. The official retirement age for Russian men is 2 years above their average life expectancy. Alzheimer's cannot be definitively diagnosed until the patient is dead. Wow. Scientists in Morocco have created a scorpion milking machine that can extract venom from 4 scorpions at once. 69 ants nests in the UK have listed building status. Wow. Britain's leading apple researcher is severely allergic to apples. Why would you choose that as a career? The US once had over 14,000 varieties of apple. Today there are only 90. iTunes customers have to agree not to use Apple products to create nuclear weapons. And nobody knows that because nobody reads the terms and conditions. MPs in the UK Parliament are not allowed to call each other asses, gits, rats, sods, swine, idiots, tarts, cowards, hooligans or gutter snipes. Which is a real shame because that pretty much sums up the whole caboodle. And here's one somebody might be able to help me with. The Habeas Corpus Act of 1679 became law only because a fat lord was counted as 10 votes and the opposition didn't notice. I've heard of habeas corpus, but I have no idea what it is. Yeah, interesting. Quite. Well, the inspecting officer has just left. I think I scraped a pass. But yeah, my day is done. And it's not, I mean, I'm not at a great work rate now because it's so neat and tidy. But I've managed to potter along throughout the day. It's mid-afternoon, just gone 3. And, you know, I've got those second early potatoes in. The sweet peas, I know I've gone early with the sweet peas, but I'm not going to worry about it. I mean, some of them are this long because they self-seeded and germinated last October, September, October. So they're done now and they can crack on. I've hoed and raked all the beds that are exposed that I can. Yeah, I'm in good order as always. So we're not around next weekend. It's my eldest son's birthday, and we're going to stay on the Bigswear estate in a couple of cabins that he's got. So we shall be doing that next weekend. Looking forward to that. So I shall be back in a fortnight, when hopefully the weather will be more conducive to growing fruits and vegetables. What I really need is the ground to dry up and the water table to drop, so I can get my peas and some other stuff in, because at the moment the ground is just waterlogged. Anyway, thank you for joining me. Thanks to those who've subscribed, and give me a thumbs up if you think you can. And all being well, I will be back in a fortnight. So until then, take care, look after yourselves, and bye for now.